Okay, so I just wanted to thank Ben for inviting me to speak today, and I'm really sorry I'm not there in person. But to be honest, if the weather is anything like in Orkney as it is in Denmark today, I'm pretty glad I didn't have to jump on a small little plane and fly across to the islands. Um, and also, I wanted to apologise for having to record this talk, uh, record it rather than deliver it by like Skype or something. But I had this really bad experience with a dodgy internet connection when I was trying to do this last time. So probably safer just to record it, and then hopefully I'll be able to phone in or something for the questions at the end. And then I guess obviously if I'm not there and I can't see you, it's a bonus for you guys, as I won't notice if you all just wander off in the middle of the talk or fall asleep at the back or something when it gets really boring. Anyway, hopefully it won't get to that point. Right, so today I wanted to talk about a few things. Obviously the headline of the talk is In Situ Olfactorisation. Basically that's smelling things whilst you're walking about an archaeological site. But before I get to all of that, I'm going to go over a few things related to my previous work, which should hopefully put some of this kind of smell work in context. First of all, I'm just going to quickly talk about why I prefer to use mixed or augmented reality rather than virtual reality. That's going to lead into a bit of chat about the previous work I did on embodied GIS, so that's combining computer-based simulations with phenomenological fieldwork. Then I'm going to talk or use a case study of a project I'm involved in called Waterloo Uncovered, which is a charity-based excavation where we work with wounded and currently serving servicemen and women, Army, Air Force and Navy, excavating the battlefield of Waterloo in Belgium. I'll then go on to talk a little bit about how and why you may want to use your nose to explore a battlefield or an archaeological site. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about some of the implications of all of this. Okay, so as archaeologists, we're always basically trying to find out what it was like to live in the past, right? And when we excavate, we pull up the artifacts or whatever, we realise where the contexts are and that kind of thing, and we can see the artifacts, we can touch them, we can feel them, and then that in turn helps us imagine kind of how they were used or whatever, and then we can also smell them. But in most cases, after all of those years in the soil, the smell has faded or it's changed, and in a funny way, that quite often leaves archaeological sites quite kind of olfactorily sterile. Obviously, it depends on what the excavation is. If you're doing a whole bunch of work on a waterlogged site or whatever, and there's quite a lot of organic remains, and obviously you're going to get the smells there. And in fact, apparently, if you're excavating olive oil factories in Sicily, for instance, or North Africa, apparently they still retain their smell after 2,000 years. So apparently it doesn't smell very good. But if I was excavating in Sicily this summer, I probably wouldn't mind too much about a bit of a stinky site. But anyway, and then obviously we can do chemical analysis of pottery vessels. That we could do residue analysis to try and find out what was in the vessel, whether it had food residues or perfume residues or what have you, and that can obviously give us a clue to the contents. But more often than not, the smell of these is usually absent. So we can find out what they were and perhaps recreate them, but in the actual artifact itself, the smell is usually absent. But in contrast, there's been kind of many attempts to sort of recreate the look of archaeological sites. So this begins very early, of course, with the first constructions of physically crafted dioramas, actual models, and then continues up to today, when we start using slightly more sophisticated technology at least. So the relaunch of affordable virtual reality with the Oculus Rift or whatever, and then the state-of-the-art kind of gaming engines that are becoming much, much easier to use, has kind of meant we're able to don these futuristic-looking headsets and step inside these perfectly, fully reconstructed past worlds. So I could be sitting in my office in an office in like Orkney, put on my headset, put on my VR headset and then get transported to Rome 2,000 years ago, you know, and I see exactly what it was like there. Use my little controller to move around, just like is happening in this video from the virtual Hadrian's Villa project. And I could do that all without leaving my desk. In fact, I could do that all without moving, apart from perhaps moving my thumb to direct myself around. However, I'll still be chained to that desk. You know, my headset will be attached to the computer, it'll be bathing my pupils in a kind of glow of pixels and processors and particles, and I will without doubt be immersed in this experience. And that's without doubt. You know, there's definite psychological flow when you're in these things, when you're in these games, when you're in these virtual reality reconstructions. But the point is that this reconstruction is then, it'll be one kind of created entirely just for me. You know, it's sort of introverted and a little bit selfish. Maybe it's all created around me. I'm the central subject of it. And then as I turn my head, the world kind of turns with me, you know, showing me kind of more and more, and I can look around and I'm really in it. But there's no escape from this virtual world without ripping off the headset and completely disengaging with it. And everything in this virtual world is kind of programmed and drawn and produced and curated. Everything is created within the kind of fire of the computer, rather than necessarily in my head. And as such, there's no absence. There's no room within those reconstructions for me to really think about what I'm looking at, because there isn't anything in that reconstruction that isn't already thought about. So even in the places where the person who created that wasn't sure what colour a certain fresco was, or or what brick pattern was used in a wall, there's always a placeholder for it. There's always something, you know, oh, okay, we don't quite know what's here, so we'll use a generic brick wall, or we don't quite know what's here, so we'll put a big, you know, red square saying we're not quite sure what's here, kind of thing. But it's not really, there's always an alternative, you know, they're always being offered, okay, they don't know what's quite here, so they put a red thing here so I can think about that red thing. There's always something everywhere in this virtual world, which means it's a sort of entirely didactic experience, really. There's no space for me to just imagine anything. There's no space for me to think about it, maybe close my eyes and think about it, because it's all there, ready-made. And I should be candid here and say I'm differentiating between a professional archaeologist and the so-called heritage public, because of course I totally understand the reasons why we may want to present a certain interpretation and tell a story, and of course VR reconstructions and gaming engines and everything are completely ideal for this, but I'm interested in how we can further develop archaeological interpretations of a site, and generally these interpretations are theorized by professional archaeologists who more often than not don't need a full reconstruction in order to help them think, because they already know sort of what's going to be there. Of course, the process of making that reconstruction may be completely invaluable, you know, so the archaeologist who's actually making that has to make all of the choices about what fresco they use and all of that kind of thing. So that's actually useful, the process of making it, but just consuming one of these things, I'm not sure that's incredibly useful in terms of sparking new interpretations of things. So for me, at least, I have to visit a site, walk around it, feel the stones, whatever, you know, don't want to get too hippie about it, but all right, dig up. We have to dig it up, you know, that's what we do. We're archaeologists. I have to actually feel this stuff, and that by actually getting my head inside this site and being there, that's how I really start to form opinions about it, or new interpretations. And for me, that's why I'm an advocate of augmented or mixed reality over full virtual reality. So for those of you who don't know, mixed reality is a sort of way of melding the real world with the virtual world. So as you can see on this graph here, we have full virtual reality on one side, which is the virtual environment on the right there. And that is where everything's created through the computer. And then we have real reality on the other side, where everything is, well, it's the real world. And then mixed reality in the middle is where these worlds kind of merge together. And then augmented reality is where we take a little bit of the virtual and a lot of the real. So I'm sure lots of people have probably by now seen these apps where you can scan barcodes or pictures or whatever, and then cool things happen. You know, you can hold up your phone to a movie poster, and then that poster will come alive and tell you something new or whatever. Or you can hold your phone up and get an interactive map of where the nearest Starbucks are, or that kind of thing. So these are all these new sort of augmented reality examples, which are being pushed by quite a lot of marketeers or what have you now. So I've previously used augmented reality in conjunction with standard GIS information. So I've done a lot of work in GIS, and then I came to this augmented reality thing through my PhD, and what I wanted to do was try and figure out how to get all of the computer information I was collecting and actually experience that in situ. So I did that. It's this sort of combination of phenomenology and computer-based analysis. So I called this the embodied GIS, and essentially it's a way of using augmented reality to meld traditional phenomenological fieldwork with GIS data. So as you can see here on this iPad shot, this is the real world with virtual roundhouses augmented onto it. So you can move around it. And if anyone's interested in this, I can talk about it a bit more later. I don't really have that much time to go into it today, and I kind of want to talk about, I want to concentrate on the smell stuff. But it is worth remembering that AR doesn't just do the visual, although that's pretty much what most people are concentrating on at the moment. We can also augment other things like sounds. If you know, a simple GPS audio guide or what have you, that's a good way of doing that. Smell, obviously I'm going to get onto that, and then to a certain extent we can do, you know, touch and taste as well, although touch and taste are a little bit more tricky. But as I say, if anyone wants to go into this a bit more, I can point you in the direction of a couple of publications, or we can have a chat in the questions at the end, or of course you can drop me a line afterwards. So, smell, here it comes. Follow the nose, as it were. Oh, there he goes. Right. Now, sensory psychologist Avery Gilbert, who wrote this book, What the Nose Knows, he's written kind of extensively about this power of smell, which to help augment a feeling of place and space. And when discussing references to smell in James Joyce's Ulysses, he says, a reader of James Joyce's Ulysses may be able to reimagine a familiar smell, but for one he doesn't know, he's left to guess. To re-experience the smells of times gone by, one needs the actual stuff. Without it, written references and therefore literature eventually lose their power. So what he's arguing here is that without the real kind of bodily experience of the smells of the gorgonzola that Bloom eats or whatever, or the smell of the sea in Dublin Bay, we're not actually able to truly understand Ulysses, or indeed the smells of times gone by. And during the interpretation and discussion of a site, archaeologists often attempt to kind of evoke an atmosphere by vividly describing sounds or smells. Yet it's harder for the reader to summon up the smell of something when reading one of these archaeological interpretations than it is to kind of close their eyes and see the picture of the landscape being kind of described by the words. You know, it's harder for us to imagine a smell in our heads than it is to just close our eyes and think about what it would have looked like. But when you actually smell the stuff, smell's really got this amazing ability to invoke kind of intense feelings and emotions, and disgust or attraction or whatever, comfort, fear, that kind of thing. It's a much more sort of primal sense in that way. So smell has obviously been used in heritage contexts a reasonable amount in the past. There isn't a lot of research on how we would use it to aid archaeological interpretation, but it is used quite a bit in especially visitor attractions and that type of thing. So here's the movable Tyrannosaurus Rex in the Natural History Museum, which was unveiled in 2001, I think. And so they had this amazing machine which roared and moved about and everything, and they thought, great, let's put this smell in as well. And so this model was intended to be accompanied by the stench of the breath of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? So this sort of rotting flesh and blood and all of that kind of thing. But as it says here, that the smell was so bad that they figured that it was probably more likely to put people off coming to see the thing than attracting people. And so they just chose this, smell of a swamp instead, which seemed to work quite well. So already you can kind of see these playing with these things, and how the smell would definitely affects how people experience things and sights and exhibits. And then smell has also been kind of shown to aid in recall of certain contextual facts. So this is a picture of the Jorvik Centre in York. I know a couple of people, Aggleton and Waskett, did an experiment to see what people remembered about the exhibits in the museum. And it turns out that, because obviously Jorvik was one of the first places to actually use these big smells and reconstructions and everything, and their research actually showed that the visitors remembered the exhibit more clearly if they were re-exposed to the same smell. So when they were talking about it afterwards, if they wafted a smell of, a Viking street scene or whatever, actually that helped people to remember what was in the exhibit, which is really quite interesting when thinking about how it might conjure up, our imagination, or help us to think through how things may have been. But what we need to remember here is that whilst this sort of corporeal or chemical reaction to a stimulus such as smell is similar for many people, the perceptual or sort of cognitive reaction may be quite different. And Kevin Walsh at York commented on the Jorvik Centre, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but essentially said that although the smells may be authentic, we can never actually smell them in the same way culturally as the Vikings did, right? So, and this kind of view of, okay, it might smell right, but is our reaction to that smell authentic as well, basically? So this view is kind of supported in other literature on the subject, which is sort of challenging this popular belief that before modern hygiene and sanitation, the past was disgusting, and I don't know how anyone could live in it, because there was open sewers and it must have really, really smelt. But of course we can't deny that. Like the past to our noses would have smelled disgusting. But smell, of course, is inherently cultural, so we quickly adapt to smells, and then rather than them always being unpleasant, quite often they become at least familiar. They may still not be particularly nice, but at least we're used to them. And the historian Neville Morley has said that, obviously if we think about Rome, for instance, whatever, the rotting food, the urine, the stink of Rome, it would have smelled horrendous, but to a Roman city dweller, it would have been home. And then perhaps for them, venturing out into the countryside would have been really smelly. So maybe the smell of a huge pile of silage or whatever it is, pile of animal manure or being spread on the fields, maybe that would have been horrible to actually someone who lives in the city. So again, we need to remember that this while we can smell the same smell, we might not actually have the same reaction to it. Now, if that's the case, and people do become kind of habituated to the smells of everyday life, then it could be argued that by recreating and exploring archaeological smells, we're not going to experience the site in the past as experience the site as people in the past did. But of course, that's the same as, you know, whatever, a virtual reality reconstruction. We're not actually seeing the site as it was experienced by past people, but by recreating past smells and experiencing them kind of in situ, we're just generating an impression of the site, which may spark ideas or open new avenues of investigation that weren't perhaps apparent before. So we're not assaulting the senses in all of the senses and putting everything in. We're just sort of wafting and nudging people, nudging archaeologists or the user or whoever to just maybe think about things in a slightly different way. So we're challenging these perceptions, and then which enables us to consider the place in a new way, both spatially, how the smells change as we move through the site, and then also temporally, how differently that place may have smelt in the past. So how do we actually do it? How do we create these things? Well, it's difficult. So there's a company called DLR who were the original company that supplied the smells to the Jorvik Centre, actually. And now they're the company used by most of the major museums that incorporate smells and everything. And they have a vast range of different smell dispensers from you know, huge, great big sort of air conditioning units to small tabletop things. But most of these dispensers are static or non-portable or very, you know, not easy to move about. They might only dispense one type of scent, or they might not be able to be remotely controlled. So my challenge for getting a smell dispenser which I could use on site was to find a way to create something that was portable enough to be worn by an archaeologist in the field, but then could also be programmed to release this scent when instructed, depending on the user's spatial location on the site, and preferably that would allow more than one of these smells to be released at a time. So I produced a very kind of early prototype of this smell device. I've called it the Dead Man's Nose for my PhD, but for the University of York's Heritage Jam in 2015, I created version 2. Now, I hope you don't mind, but in a sec I'm going to play the full video of that for you here. Apologies to those of you who may have already seen it, but I think it works quite well, and it also shows a few kind of scenarios of the Dead Man's Nose in use and everything. So I'll just pop that on now. So before we go out in the field, I just want to go on the prehistoric trail. I just want to demonstrate kind of back in the lab how this thing works, so you get a better idea of what's going on. So we have here, first of all, a simple 3D printed box which contains an Arduino board at the bottom. That's the blue one, an Arduino Uno, and then on the top of that we have this red board, which is a Bluetooth board. So this enables my mobile phone to connect to the Arduino board via Bluetooth, which is really good because it means there's no wires, basically. Then connected to that we have 4 pins here, 4 of these power pins with a ground, and they lead off around all of these wires to the fans here. So let me just take one of these fans off and I'll show you what that's all about. Hopefully you can see there it's got a little fan in the box here which spins round, and then inside here, if I pull this out, we have a little drawer
And in that drawer you have a little piece of cotton wool, and that cotton wool has a bit of scent on it. That is a particularly foul scent. I think it's maybe Cannibal Cave or something, not a good one. Anyway, pop that back in. So when the app tells the fan to start spinning round, the blower spins round, sucks up the air from inside the drawer, blows it out straight towards your nose. As you see here, we've got Velcro on the bottom of these, so theoretically you could attach these fans wherever really, to your clothes or whatever you wanted to do. In this case, I've put them all on just on a board here that you can then just pop around your neck, and then it just hangs just kind of around on your chest, blowing upwards towards your nose. These are the examples of some of the smells that you can buy. I got them from a place called Dale Air, so they just come in a little liquid like that, and they're very, very easy to apply to the cotton wool. Okay, so just as an example here, let's pop this back on. Just keep that safe. I'll get the dust out. At the moment I've just got this connected up to my computer. When we're out in the field we can use this external battery, which means we don't have to have it USB'd into my computer. But just for an example here, so what I'm going to do is just connect up the app. So it's a very, very simple app. You can see here it's got my coordinates and then also a bunch of different buttons. If I press the connect button here, that is now connected via Bluetooth to the Arduino board in here, and has given me all of these options. So if I press one of these buttons, these fans will spin round. But what I want to do, rather than doing that, is just to show you how the location works. So I've got a lat long here, and for those of canny ones amongst you, you'll recognise that as the lat long for London. And I'm actually currently in Molshgarv Museum. But what I've done here, I'm just using London to simulate a location so that I can move to our actual location on the prehistoric trail. So I can do that via the computer. So if I just change our location to, let's say, Skovmollen. So you'll see here that as I've just simulated me moving into Skovmollen, so moving near the mill, it said entering region Skovmollen. Click OK, and you'll see that it's turned on this fan, and also it's obviously changed my coordinates. I don't know if you can see that fan spinning around there. Letting out a nice sort of farmyardy smell, that one. So I can then, simulate my location to somewhere else. If we simulate my location to one of the long barrows, it says entering the long barrow, and there you see this one has actually got two smells. So this one's running these two smells together to make a kind of cacosmia, I suppose you'd call it, cacosmia of smell. So that's about it. That's how it works basically. You walk into the smell zone. It clicks on the smells, and that's where we go from there. So let's go and pop that over your head. That's it. There you go. Pop that in your pocket. With that. Right.
They're not falling off. There are they, like the poo.
Can you smell anything?
Oh. I guess it's kind of smoky and kind of woody. Well, it's a very kind of evocative smell that I can't recognise. That's the thing. It's kind of like cold smoke, cold wood smoke or something. But I can't quite place it, and it's mingling with the smell, the natural smell here as well. So
I have a smell. But it's a bit musty.
Yeah, what other things?
Also air. Also a bit fiery.
A bit fiery. Yeah, okay. Right here, I'm really starting to smell like cow poo. And yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's kind of like old rotting straw and yeah, poo really. It's kind of, farmy. It's a kind of farmy smell, which I suppose makes sense.
The new Moshgar Museum in Aarhus has recently been opened. They've invested really heavily in the audio, visual and tactile experiences with lifelike fire effects, models and interactive exhibits. They haven't, however, invested very much in smells. So the Dead Man's Nose could act as a personalised smell tour around the museum, activating when you reach an exhibit, making the already impressive experiences even more visceral. Not least the Illerup Ode battle gallery. Once the slaughter is over, something else, to smell the stench of war.
Okay. So as you can see from that video, we filmed all of that. We filmed all of that at the weekend with with the family. So I'm sorry about the kids and everything. But anyway, so as you can see from that video, the Dead Man's Nose can be used in think of lots of different situations, archaeological sites. But for the purposes of this talk, I just wanted to talk a bit more about this project that I'm working on at Waterloo Uncovered. So what is it? So the Battle of Waterloo, fought on the 18th of June, 1815, for those of you who don't know, was the final battle in the Napoleonic Wars and represented the beginning of a period of relative peace-ish within Europe. So nearly 120,000 soldiers took the field from most of the major nations of Europe, which resulted in 65,000 people being wounded or killed, and countless horses and all of that kind of thing. And so during 2015, which was the bicentenary of the battle, the Waterloo Uncovered project began a 5-year campaign to excavate and investigate and record the battlefield. So this project's unusual in that, as well as professional archaeologists, the team's also made up of wounded army veterans as well, and serving soldiers from modern conflicts. So you may have heard of the project Operation Nightingale, which has worked a little bit, and basically these projects bring the veterans and archaeologists together, and then we use the archaeology to kind of aid in the rehabilitation and skill development of the soldiers, and it works extremely well. For me, this was one of my first experiences of battlefield archaeology, which has been great actually, because battlefield archaeology is obviously quite unique in that most battles take place over a very short amount of time. You know, it might be a week or it might just be a few hours. Waterloo was a whole day. And then as an archaeologist, I'm used to excavating kind of landscapes that have been utilised over, thousands of years. And so picking the archaeology of a single day apart, so taking this archaeology of this single day in isolation from the kind of centuries of other activities, quite challenging, but also really rewarding. But it does mean we need to remember that the battlefield wasn't just the Battle of Waterloo. It had obviously previous and subsequent use, And when we're trying to create a smellscape of this battlefield, we need to bear that in mind as well, this sort of temporal depth as well. So when we're doing it, the dead man's nose needs to not only represent the smells of the battlefield on the day of the battle, but also have this temporal depth that respects the possible smells of the landscape before and after as well. So Waterloo Uncovered is concentrated. We concentrated our first year of excavations on the chateau complex at Hougoumont. Hougoumont was a key part of the Allied defence during the battle, and there was a lot of fighting, and the Allies managed to hold out, and it was a very, very kind of key fortification, and very possibly, by holding out there, that's why Wellington won. But there's all sorts of theories about that. Anyway, we decided to excavate there because there's lots of interesting stories and everything about it. So prior to the battle, Hougoumont was a working farm with a sort of tower-type chateau and associated formal gardens, and I'll show you some pictures of that soon. And then, following the battle, Hougoumont gradually went back to being a working farm again, although the formal gardens never quite sort of recovered. They were never really remade, although they're planning on remaking them this year, I think, or next year. And of course, after the battle, directly after the battle, the whole place was just a mixture of graves, charnel pits, kit, uniforms, dead bodies, dead horses, all sorts of things, burnt buildings, people scavenging around. It must have been horrendous. And there you go. And now it's mostly farmland and woodland. That's what it looks like today. So here's just some pictures of the gardens. This is obviously not the actual garden itself, but this is the type of gardens that would have been there. And then we've also got some pictures here of the little picture on the left. There is one of the gates at Hougoumont, and that's obviously a contemporary-ish painting of what it would have looked like when the French were attacking. And then here's some pictures of the aftermath there of that same gate, with the bodies all being poured into a pit. Pretty horrendous, and it actually got worse because these bodies were poured into this pit and buried straight after the battle, or a few days after the battle. But then there was a horrible flooding incident a little bit later, and in fact it washed the bodies back up again the next year. So the half decomposed bodies were washed back up again, and so actually then they had to burn them all. So it's a pretty icky place, basically. So I've divided Hougoumont into sort of 3 or 4 rough spatial areas. There's a farmyard, the formal gardens, and the orchard, and I've also divided the sort of temporal aspect into 4 time periods. So we've got the 17th of June, which is the day before the battle, the 18th of June, the day of the battle, the 3 or 4 days afterwards, and then late 1815 when the farm reverted to its former usage. So if we just have a look here, so that flower is in the formal gardens, that's sort of representing the smell there, which would be, flowers or what have you. And then the farmyard, so the actual working farm there, which I've represented as there's a special scent called Dale Air scent called Farmyard. And then there's the orchard there, which I used, can't quite remember what the name of the scent is, like fresh leaves or something like that for that. And it should point out here that I'm sort of using these smells as the foreground smells of those particular times. So obviously there's a smellscape is like anything, like a soundscape or a landscape. It's made up of all sorts of different elements, but I'm using these sort of foreground smells here. So then the day of the battle, you've got gunfire, or gunpowder, you've got fire, you've got people dying, you've got cannon smoke, you've got blood and guts and all of that kind of thing. And then in the aftermath there, you've got the kind of cleanup. So the buildings at Hougoumont were burnt down, so there's this residual smell of fire and everything, and then the bodies being buried, the slightly decomposing bodies, etc., etc. And then later in 1815, everything basically comes back to normal again. So by configuring all of those spatial and temporal conditions, now all I needed to do was just connect the dead man's nose to the application, load the smell boxes, as you saw in the video, with the correct smells, and then attaching those smell boxes around the neck, and then walking out into Hougoumont itself. The prototype application is a very simple interface that kind of allows you to choose which time period you want to explore, and then as you physically walk around the site and enter the different smell zones, then the correct fan begins to rotate, as you saw in the video, and then that smell is wafted to the nose, basically. So as smells have a kind of spatial and temporal dimension, this application was really designed to create a temporarily changing smellscape that also updates as the user moves through the spatial landscape. But of course, it's possible to play around with these, to experiment with them and see how it might change one's interpretation or one's idea of what's going on. So for instance, you could get an idea of how the area smelled throughout the whole time, right? So you could release all the scents of the battlefields at once. So you can have all 4 of the temporal dimensions and all 4 of the spatial areas at once, and you would have this huge kind of, well, it's not cacophony because that's sound, but the smell equivalent of a cacophony. All of these smells at once. Or you could stand in one location on the site, so for instance in the orchard, and then release all of the smells from all of the time zones at once, so you get this sort of temporal dimension there that, okay, this is the sort of temporal smellscape of this particular location. Or of course you could have all the smells of one day at a time, and then you could perhaps do this remotely as well. Like if I'd have thought about it in advance, I could have given Ben one of these things to put up in the lecture theatre there, and you could have pressed a button and then you could have smelt Waterloo while I'm talking. So there's quite a lot of ways you can play around with this as well, although it is best experienced actually on site. So the ethics of this, to start with. I haven't actually done any official user testing or survey or anything of this being undertaken at Waterloo, beyond just trying out in the field. And there are a number of reasons for this. The first being it's just a prototype, so I've kind of been concentrating on getting the technology to work, therefore the user interface is not really very user friendly at the moment. And then the second reason, of course, is ethical, and it brings to the fore this emotive nature of smells. So in many cases smell can be a powerful trigger of panic attacks, that type of thing, especially among those who suffer from combat stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. And there was a study undertaken in 2004 of Cambodian refugees who were escaping from Pol Pot. And this study basically showed that smell-triggered panic attacks, they can be caused among these refugees by exposure to a number of varied odours, things such as car exhaust fumes, cigarette smoke, and cooking smells and stuff. Just these smells which may have been, they may seem quite normal, but because of the situation that they smelled them in during the Pol Pot regime, that actually takes them back to that time and then triggers these panic attacks. And this similar thing can happen with the wounded soldiers as well. And of course, Waterloo Uncovered has a number of these veterans suffering from PTSD, and so by sort of trying it out on them without doing it carefully would have been unnecessarily traumatic. So it needs to be correctly handled. So to that end, we're planning a kind of formalised testing phase in conjunction with the MOD's Defence Medical Services, and we're going to see whether or not we can play about a little bit with the ethics and the kind of efficacy of experimenting with this, and perhaps begin to use it as part of the veterans therapy program. Okay, so what's the sort of implications of this, and what does it mean for archaeologists? Well, by making this device portable, it's possible to kind of walk around an existing site and then experience these reconstructions of past smells, but in situ. And this is quite evocative as you do it, but importantly, again, it's this making, so the actual thinking about what smells you're going to use where has helped me quite a lot to figure out on various sites what it might mean and how that all works. So again, it's a little bit like the virtual reconstructions in that if you're making them, then you have to ask and answer all of these questions. And so if you're making these smells or making this smellscape, you also have to do the same thing. And it's important for me to move these idea of smells away from kind of, Disneyfication and towards a proper scholarly approach. Obviously, this work may go some way towards that, but there's a really long way to go so far. But hopefully I'm beginning to push things a little bit so that we can start thinking about it, not just as, oh, I went to see the T-Rex and he smelled of rotting flesh, but perhaps using it in a slightly more intelligent way. The other thing, of course, is that olfactory visualization or stimulation or whatever, it does happen in a different part of our brain, and in the hippocampus, which is the more sort of animal or primal part of our brain, and therefore it affects us in very different ways, and our reactions to the smells are very different from what we see. So already we're thinking differently about a site if we are experiencing a smell when we're there. And again, just as I was saying about the ethics and everything, you have to be careful with you really have to be careful with smell, basically, because it can really affect people in lots of unexpected ways. So the ethical issues of it need to be taken into account. So in kind of conclusion, I guess the Dead Man's Nose is relatively low cost, and it's quite expandable, and it's got endless possible configurations. So the device and the application and everything hopefully have a interesting potential for future work and for enriching the exploration, interpretation and enjoyment of archaeological sites. And by recreating the smells of the past, we're not necessarily, as I said, experiencing them or interpreting them as past people would have done, but instead they're kind of using us, we can use them as an aid to challenge the way we think about a site or a landscape. So in the case of Hougoumont, Waterloo, which is now, a bucolic landscape of wheat fields and gently rolling hills, beyond the various kind of memorial stones, there's not a lot of hint on the ground of all the slaughter and kind of chaos that took place 200 years ago. But by walking about and being directly assaulted with this kind of smell of the battle, burning buildings, human anguish, all that kind of thing, some of that landscape's hidden history is revealed. And then hopefully by walking through the historical smellscape, we gain a sort of greater understanding of our place within the story of that foreign field.